Mother Bear carried a lost human baby across a frozen river to the hospital. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The wind howled through the pine trees like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of another brutal winter night. Snow fell in thick sheets across the mountain village of Cedar Falls, blanketing everything in a deceptive peace. But peace was the last thing on Luna's mind as she trudged through the forest, her massive paws leaving deep prints in the fresh powder. Luna was no ordinary bear. At 8 years old, she had raised 3 cubs of her own, each one teaching her something new about the fierce love that burned in a mother's heart. Tonight, her latest cub, a playful little male she called Shadow, padded beside her through the woods. He was old enough now to follow her on longer journeys, his dark fur almost invisible against the night. They were heading back to their den when Luna's nose picked up something that made her freeze mid-step. Shadow bumped into her massive hindquarters, letting out a confused grunt. But Luna wasn't moving. Her nostrils flared as she tested the air again and again. The scent was wrong. All wrong. It was human, yes, but not like the usual hikers or hunters who occasionally wandered through their territory. This was different, smaller, sweeter, and mixed with something that made Luna's maternal instincts surge like lightning through her veins. Fear. Pure, helpless fear. Without hesitation, Luna changed direction, following the scent trail that led deeper into the forest. Shadow whined softly, confused by his mother's sudden urgency, but he followed obediently. The trail led them through a maze of snow-laden branches and over fallen logs, growing stronger with each step. Then Luna heard it. A sound that stopped her heart cold. Crying. Not the wailing of an injured animal or the howl of the wind. This was something else entirely. Something that called to every protective instinct she possessed. The cry was weak, barely audible above the storm, but to Luna's ears it might as well have been a scream. She broke into a lumbering run, Shadow scrambling to keep up. The trees seemed to part before her as she followed the sound, her massive form moving with surprising grace through the undergrowth. The crying grew louder, more desperate, until finally she burst into a small clearing. What she saw there would haunt her dreams for years to come. Lying in the snow, nearly buried under a thin blanket that offered no protection against the cold, was a human baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old, its tiny fists waving weakly in the air as it cried. Its lips were already turning blue, and its breathing came in shallow, rapid gasps. Luna approached slowly, her ears flattened against her head. Every instinct told her to stay away from the human child, to protect her own cub and flee. But as she got closer, something extraordinary happened. The baby's eyes found hers. In that moment, Luna saw something that transcended species, that reached beyond the boundaries of the natural world. She saw pure innocence, complete vulnerability, and a trust so absolute it took her breath away. The baby's crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft cooing sound that seemed to say, "Please, help me." Shadow circled nervously behind his mother, sensing her agitation but not understanding its cause. He had never seen a human this close before, certainly never one so small and helpless. To him it smelled strange, foreign, potentially dangerous. But Luna saw only a baby who was dying in the cold, just as her own cub would if left alone in such conditions. The wind picked up again, and she watched in horror as the infant's little body shivered violently. It wouldn't survive another hour in these conditions, maybe not even another few minutes. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings. Humans meant danger. They meant guns and traps and death for her kind. Getting involved with human affairs had never ended well for any bear she'd known. But as she looked down at the tiny, helpless creature, all of that seemed to fade into irrelevance. Slowly, carefully, Luna lowered her massive head toward the baby. The infant's eyes widened, but it didn't cry. Instead, it reached up with one tiny hand, its fingers barely brushing against her wet nose. The touch sent an electric shock through Luna's entire being. This wasn't just any baby. Somehow, some way, this was her baby now. Without another moment's hesitation, Luna opened her jaws and carefully, gently lifted the blanket-wrapped infant. The baby fit easily in her mouth, its weight no more than that of a small fish. She could feel its rapid heartbeat against her tongue, could smell the sweet scent of human milk on its breath. Shadow's eyes went wide with disbelief. His mother had just picked up a human baby. In all his months of life, nothing had prepared him for this moment. He let out a confused whimper, but Luna paid him no attention. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating distances, routes, possibilities. The village of Cedar Falls lay 2 miles away across the frozen Clearwater River. On the far side of the village sat the small medical clinic that served the entire mountain community. Luna had watched the building many times from the tree line, had seen the humans in white coats coming and going. If anywhere could help this baby, it would be there. But getting there meant crossing the river. The ice had been forming for weeks, but it was still early in the season. Would it hold her weight? Would it hold all 3 of them? There was only one way to find out. Luna began walking toward the river, the baby's warmth spreading through her mouth like a tiny sun. Behind her, Shadow followed reluctantly, his young mind struggling to process what was happening. The storm continued to rage around them, but Luna moved with purpose now, driven by an instinct older than fear, stronger than self-preservation. As they approached the river's edge, Luna could see the ice stretching out before them like a pale highway in the moonlight. It looked solid enough, but appearances could be deceiving. She had seen other animals break through at the edges where the ice was thinnest, had watched the hungry water swallow them whole. But the baby in her mouth was growing colder. She could feel its little body losing heat, could sense its life force ebbing like a candle in the wind. There was no time for second thoughts, no room for doubt. Luna stepped onto the ice. The surface held, creaking ominously under her weight but supporting her massive frame. She took another step, then another, moving slowly and deliberately. Each footfall sent small vibrations through the ice, and she could hear the river flowing darkly beneath her feet. Shadow hesitated at the edge, whimpering softly. He was lighter than his mother, less likely to break through, but the sight of the black water visible through cracks in the ice terrified him. Luna paused and turned back, her eyes meeting his across the short distance. "Come," her gaze seemed to say. "Trust me." Shadow took a tentative step onto the ice, then another. His claws scraped against the surface as he tried to find purchase, but he managed to stay upright. Mother and cub began their crossing together, 2 dark shapes moving across the pale expanse like shadows across a frozen dream. Halfway across, disaster struck. A loud crack echoed across the river like a gunshot. Luna felt the ice shift beneath her feet, saw a spiderweb of fractures spreading out from where she stood. The baby in her mouth let out a weak cry, as if sensing the danger. Luna had to make a choice. She could turn back, try to reach the safety of the shore she'd come from, or she could push forward, racing against time and physics to reach the other side before the ice gave way completely. She looked ahead to where the lights of Cedar Falls twinkled in the distance. The clinic was there, somewhere in that cluster of warm, glowing windows. Safety, help, chance for the baby to live. Luna ran. Her powerful legs drove her forward across the cracking ice, each step sending new fissures shooting out in all directions. Behind her, Shadow scrambled to keep up, his claws clicking frantically against the breaking surface. The baby bounced gently in Luna's mouth, its small form cushioned by her careful grip. 20 yards from shore, the ice began to collapse completely. Luna felt her hind legs break through into the freezing water, the shock of cold driving all breath from her lungs. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. The baby's life depended on her reaching land. With a final, desperate lunge, Luna hurled herself onto the snowy bank. She landed hard, her body skidding across the frozen ground, but she managed to keep the baby safe in her jaws. Shadow leaped after her, barely escaping as the ice behind them shattered completely, opening up a jagged wound in the river's surface. For a moment, Luna lay in the snow, panting heavily. The baby in her mouth had gone ominously quiet, and panic seized her heart. Had she been too late? Had the cold and the rough crossing already claimed the tiny life she was trying to save? Then she heard it, a soft, barely audible sound that filled her with relief, so intense it was almost painful. The baby was still breathing. Luna raised her head and looked toward the lights of Cedar Falls. They were so close now, maybe half a mile through the forest. The lights seemed to pulse with warmth and promise, calling her forward like beacons in the storm. The hardest part of their journey was just beginning. Luna struggled to her feet, her legs trembling from the cold and exertion. Ice crystals clung to her thick fur, and she could feel the frozen water from the river slowly seeping through to her skin. But none of that mattered now. The baby in her mouth was all that existed in her world. She began moving again, more slowly this time. The forest here was different from the wild woods she knew so well. These trees showed signs of human presence, marked trails, cut branches, the faint smell of wood smoke and gasoline. Shadow pressed close to her side, his young nose twitching at the unfamiliar scents. As they walked, Luna became aware of something that filled her with a new kind of dread. The baby's breathing was becoming more labored, more irregular. The tiny body in her mouth felt alarmingly cold, and the infant's limbs had gone completely still. Time was running out faster than she had feared. Then, through the trees ahead, she saw the first glow of electric lights. Cedar Falls was built on a gentle slope that led down to the river, and from her position on the forest's edge, Luna could see the entire village spread out below her like a collection of glowing jewels scattered across a dark cloth. Most of the houses showed only dim porch lights or the blue flicker of television screens behind curtains. The streets were empty, buried under several inches of fresh snow. But there, near the center of town, one building blazed with light from every window, the clinic. Dr. Sarah Chen had been on duty for 16 hours straight. As the only doctor in Cedar Falls, she often found herself working impossible hours, especially during the winter months when accidents were more common. Tonight had been relatively quiet. Just a case of the flu from the Morrison family and old Pete's arthritis acting up again. She was just about to close her eyes for a few minutes when she heard something that made her blood run cold. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it was too sustained, too deliberate. Then it rose into something that sounded almost like, "Was that a bear?" she whispered to herself, moving quietly to the window. Dr. Chen had lived in Cedar Falls for 8 years, ever since finishing her residency in Denver. She had chosen this remote mountain community specifically because she wanted to help people who had limited access to medical care. She had dealt with bear encounters before, treating campers who had gotten too close, patching up hunters who had surprised a mother with cubs. But she had never heard anything quite like this. The sound came again, closer this time. It was definitely a bear, but there was something strange about the call. It wasn't aggressive or territorial. If she hadn't known better, she would have said it sounded almost pleading. Luna stood at the edge of the tree line, looking down at the bright building below. She could smell the antiseptic scents even from this distance, could sense the warmth radiating from the structure. But between her and salvation lay 200 yards of open ground. Open ground meant exposure. It meant humans seeing her, meant potential danger for herself and Shadow. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the deep forest. But the baby in her mouth let out a weak whimper, and Luna felt something break open in her chest. This tiny human had somehow become more important to her than her own safety, more important than anything. She stepped out of the trees. The snow was deeper here, where the wind had swept it into drifts against the buildings. Luna had to lift her legs high with each step, plowing through snow that sometimes reached her belly. Shadow struggled behind her, occasionally disappearing completely into the deeper drifts before emerging with a snow-covered nose. They were halfway to the clinic when the first human saw them. Marcus Thompson had been the night security guard at Cedar Falls Medical Clinic for 3 years. It wasn't much of a job. Mostly, it involved making sure the doors were locked and occasionally escorting drunk teenagers off the property. He spent most of his shifts reading paperback novels and drinking coffee from a thermos his wife packed for him. He was reaching for his book when movement outside caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just shadows from the trees moving in the wind. Then the shadows resolved into shapes, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Holy," he breathed, grabbing for the phone with trembling hands. "Dr. Chen, you need to see this. Now, we've got a situation outside." Dr. Chen rushed to the front window, expecting to see a drunk driver or maybe someone injured in the storm. What she saw instead made her question her own sanity. A massive brown bear was walking directly toward the clinic, moving slowly but deliberately through the snow. Behind it, barely visible against the white ground, a smaller bear followed. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that the mother bear appeared to be carrying something in her mouth. Something small and pale that looked disturbingly like... "Oh my God," Dr. Chen whispered. "Marcus, call the sheriff. Now." "Already on it, Doc. But what do you think that bear's got in its mouth?" Dr. Chen couldn't answer. She was too busy staring at the impossible scene unfolding outside her clinic. The mother bear had stopped about 50 feet from the building and was looking directly at the window where she stood. Their eyes met across the distance, and Dr. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. The bear's gaze was intelligent, purposeful, and filled with a desperation that transcended species. Luna knew she was taking the biggest risk of her life. Every survival instinct told her that approaching the humans was suicide. But the baby in her mouth was fading fast, its tiny heartbeat growing weaker with each passing moment. She had come too far to give up now. Slowly, carefully, Luna approached the clinic's front door. The building was larger up close, and she could see human shapes moving behind the glass. Their scents reached her. Fear, confusion, adrenaline. She could hear them talking in rapid, urgent tones. When she was just 20 feet from the door, Luna stopped. She gently lowered her head and placed the blanket-wrapped baby in the snow. The infant lay still for a moment, then let out a weak cry that seemed impossibly loud in the frozen air. Inside the clinic, Dr. Chen gasped. "It's a baby. Marcus, that bear has a baby. That's impossible. Bears don't. They wouldn't. I'm going out there." "Doc, you can't. That's a wild bear. It could tear you apart." But Dr. Chen was already reaching for her coat. She had taken an oath to do no harm, to save lives whenever possible. The creature outside that door, human or otherwise, clearly needed help. Luna watched as the glass door of the clinic opened. A human female emerged, moving slowly and carefully. The bear could smell the woman's fear, but she could also sense something else: compassion. The same maternal instinct that had driven Luna to risk everything for a baby that wasn't her own. Dr. Chen stepped into the snow, her hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Easy, girl," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Luna's ears flicked at the sound of the human's voice. She had heard human speech before, from a distance, but never directed at her with such gentleness. The woman took another step forward, and Luna's muscles tensed, ready to defend the baby if necessary. But the human wasn't approaching Luna. She was moving toward the small bundle in the snow. Dr. Chen's medical training took over as she knelt beside the baby. Even in the dim light from the clinic, she could see that the infant was in serious condition. Hypothermia, dehydration, possibly worse. The baby couldn't be more than 2 or 3 months old, and it was dressed in what looked like a thin onesie under an inadequate blanket. "How long have you been out here, little one?" she whispered, carefully lifting the baby. The child was barely responsive, its skin cold and pale. "We need to get you inside right now." She looked up at the massive bear standing over her. Luna's eyes were fixed on the baby, her entire body radiating protective tension. Dr. Chen had the strangest feeling that the bear was evaluating her, deciding whether she could be trusted with the precious cargo. "Thank you," Dr. Chen said quietly, meeting Luna's gaze. "I don't know how you found this baby, or why you brought it here, but you saved its life." Luna took a step back as the human stood with the baby in her arms. She could smell the antiseptic scents clinging to the woman's clothing, could see the gentleness in her movements. This human would help the baby. Luna was certain of it. But as Dr. Chen turned toward the clinic door, Luna felt a pain she hadn't expected. The baby she had risked everything to save was being taken away from her. After carrying it for miles, protecting it with her life, she was losing it to the humans. Shadow sensed his mother's distress and pressed against her side, whimpering softly. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel Luna's anguish as if it were his own. Dr. Chen paused at the clinic door and looked back. The mother bear was still standing in the snow, her cub beside her, watching the baby with eyes that seemed almost human in their sadness. "Marcus," she called over her shoulder, "cancel that call to the sheriff. Tell them it was a false alarm." "But Doc, the bear is leaving," she said firmly, though Luna hadn't moved an inch. "And this baby needs immediate attention." Inside the clinic, Dr. Chen worked with practiced efficiency to warm and stabilize the infant. As she started an IV and wrapped the baby in heated blankets, she couldn't stop thinking about what she had witnessed outside. In 20 years of medicine, she had seen many things that challenged her understanding of the world. But nothing quite like this. The baby was severely hypothermic and dehydrated, but alive. Another hour in the cold would have been fatal. Somehow, impossibly, a wild bear had not only found this abandoned child, but had carried it to safety. As she worked, Dr. Chen found herself glancing repeatedly at the window. The mother bear was still there, standing motionless in the snow like a sentinel. Waiting. Luna couldn't bring herself to leave. Every fiber of her being told her to return to the forest, to take Shadow back to their den where they would be safe. But the baby was in there, in that bright building filled with human scents and strange sounds. Her baby now, even if the humans didn't understand. Shadow had curled up in the snow beside her, tired from their long journey. But Luna remained standing, her eyes fixed on the building where warm light spilled from every window. She could hear sounds from inside, voices, the beeping of strange machines, footsteps on hard floors. Was the baby safe? Was it warm? Would the humans be able to help it in ways that she never could? Hours passed. The storm began to subside, and a thin gray light started to creep across the eastern horizon. Luna had not moved from her vigil, despite the cold seeping into her bones and the hunger gnawing at her stomach. Inside the clinic, Dr. Chen finally allowed herself a moment of relief. The baby's temperature was rising steadily, and its color was returning to normal. The child was going to survive. She looked out the window again and was surprised to see the bear still there. As their eyes met through the glass, Dr. Chen felt an odd connection form. This wasn't just any bear. This was a mother who had done something extraordinary to save a life. On impulse, Dr. Chen lifted the now sleeping baby to the window. Luna's ears perked forward as she saw the small bundle, and for just a moment, both mothers, human and bear, shared a moment of perfect understanding. The baby was safe. Luna looked at her own cub, curled peacefully in the snow beside her. Shadow was her responsibility, her blood, her future. She had risked his life as well as her own for the human baby, and now it was time to put his needs first. With one last look at the clinic window, Luna nudged Shadow awake. The young bear stumbled to his feet, shaking snow from his fur. Together, they turned away from the lights and warmth of the human world and began walking back toward the dark forest. But they had only gone a few steps when they heard something that stopped them cold. A scream. Not from the baby. This was something else entirely. Something that sounded like pure terror echoing from the heart of the village. Luna turned back, her ears swiveling to track the sound. It was coming from somewhere deeper in Cedar Falls, away from the clinic. The scream came again, accompanied by a commotion of voices and what sounded like someone running through the snow. Shadow whined nervously, confused by his mother's hesitation. They had completed their mission. The baby was safe. Why weren't they going home? But Luna's protective instincts, already heightened by the night's events, were telling her that something else was wrong. Very wrong. And despite every rational thought in her head, she found herself moving not toward the forest, but deeper into the human village. Behind them, the clinic continued to glow in the pre-dawn darkness, its warmth holding the baby she had saved. But ahead, somewhere in the maze of houses and streets, another crisis was unfolding. Luna had no way of knowing that her night of heroism was far from over, or that the baby she had risked everything to save would soon be in danger again. This time, the threat wouldn't come from the cold or the wilderness. It would come from the humans themselves. The screams grew louder as Luna padded through the village streets, Shadow reluctantly following behind her. The young cub's instincts were screaming at him to flee, to get as far away from the human settlement as possible. But his mother's determination was absolute, and he would follow her anywhere. Luna's keen senses guided her through the maze of houses toward the source of the disturbance. The scent trail was complex, multiple humans, fear, anger, and something else that made her fur stand on end. Desperation. 3 blocks from the clinic, Luna rounded a corner and found herself looking at a scene that defied comprehension. A small, run-down house sat at the end of a dead-end street, its front yard crawling with human activity. But these weren't the peaceful villagers she had observed from the forest. These humans carried weapons. Sheriff Tom Rodriguez had been awakened by his radio crackling to life at 4:47 a.m. The call had come from Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the elderly woman who lived at 1247 Pine Street. Her voice had been barely coherent through her sobs, but the words Tom had managed to make out were enough to get him out of bed and into his patrol car in record time. Baby crying, house next door. Henderson's been gone for weeks. Something's not right. The Hendersons. Tom knew them well. Jake Henderson was a drifter who had moved to Cedar Falls 2 years ago with his girlfriend Marie. They had kept to themselves mostly, though there had been a few domestic disturbance calls. The last time Tom had seen them was nearly a month ago, when Jake had been arrested for public intoxication. Now, as Tom stood in the Hendersons' front yard with 3 of his deputies, he was beginning to understand why Mrs. Whitman had been so distraught. The sound coming from inside the house was unmistakable. A baby crying. Weak, exhausted, but definitely a baby. "Jake Henderson, Marie Henderson," Tom called through a bullhorn. "This is Sheriff Rodriguez. We know you're in there. We need to talk to you about the welfare of a child." No response. The house remained dark and silent except for the pitiful wailing from somewhere inside. Deputy Mike Foster, a young man fresh out of the academy, shifted nervously beside his sheriff. "Sir, shouldn't we just go in?" "If there's a baby in there, we can't just break down the door without a warrant," Tom replied, though every instinct told him the time was running out. "But if we can establish immediate danger to a child—" Another scream split the night air, but this one was different. This was an adult's voice, filled with pain and terror. It came from inside the house, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. "That's it," Tom said grimly. "Mike, call for backup. Jenny, radio for an ambulance. We're going in." From her position, hidden behind a snow-covered car, Luna watched the humans prepare to enter the house. Her extraordinary hearing had picked up sounds that the humans couldn't detect. Whimpering, not just from the baby, but from what sounded like an adult woman. And underneath it all, a low, growling voice that made Luna's hackles rise. Shadow crouched beside her, trembling with more than just cold. The young bear could sense his mother's agitation, could smell the violence and fear emanating from the house across the street. He didn't understand why they were here, why his mother had brought them into this dangerous place filled with humans and their weapons. Luna's ears flicked as she heard the front door of the house splinter open. The humans with guns rushed inside, their heavy boots stomping across wooden floors. Seconds later, more shouting erupted. "Jesus Christ! Mike, get in here now! Where's the baby? Where's the goddamn baby? Check the back rooms. Jenny, we need that ambulance here 5 minutes ago." Luna crept closer, using the cover of a rusted pickup truck to get within 30 feet of the house. Through the broken front door she could see lights flashing, could smell blood and something else that made her stomach turn. Sickness, infection, death. Inside the house, Sheriff Rodriguez felt his dinner threatening to come back up. The living room was a disaster zone. Overturned furniture, broken glass, and dark stains on the carpet that could only be blood. The smell was overwhelming. Human waste, rotting food, and the sickly sweet scent of decay. But it was the woman huddled in the corner that made his stomach lurch. Marie Henderson was barely recognizable, her face swollen and bruised beyond recognition. She clutched something to her chest, rocking back and forth while making a low, keening sound. "Marie?" Tom approached slowly, his weapon holstered but his hand ready. "Marie, it's Sheriff Rodriguez. Where's Jake? Where's the baby?" Marie looked up at him with eyes that held no recognition, no sanity. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He took her," she said. "He took my baby, said she was making too much noise. Been gone so long. Who took her, Marie?" "Jake took the baby?" "Dark place," Marie continued, as if she hadn't heard him. "Cold place, where the old things sleep. He said He said he'd make it stop crying forever. Deputy Foster emerged from the back of the house, his face pale. "Sheriff, there's no baby here, but I found this." He held up a small pink onesie, stained with what looked like dirt and dried blood. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. He had been born and raised in Cedar Falls, had explored every inch of the surrounding wilderness as a boy. When Marie said, "dark place where the old things sleep," he had a terrible suspicion he knew exactly where she meant: the abandoned mine shaft, 3 miles up the mountain, hidden in a grove of dead trees. The shaft had been sealed decades ago, but Tom knew that desperate people sometimes found ways inside. It was a place where someone could hide something, or someone. "Mike, Jenny, stay with Marie. Get her to the hospital as soon as the ambulance arrives," Tom ordered. "Radio for more backup and meet me at the old Fletcher mine and bring climbing gear." As the sheriff rushed back to his patrol car, Luna made a decision that would change everything. She had heard the human woman's words, had smelled the fear and desperation in her voice. Somewhere up on the mountain, another baby was in danger. Shadow whined as his mother began moving away from the village, heading uphill toward the dark forest. He was exhausted, hungry, and confused by the night's strange events. All he wanted was to return to their warm den and sleep. But Luna's maternal instincts were in overdrive now. She had already saved one human baby tonight. She couldn't ignore another. The path up the mountain was treacherous, made worse by the fresh snow and ice. Luna's powerful legs carried her steadily upward, but Shadow struggled to keep pace. Several times he slipped on the icy rocks, crying out as he scraped his paws on the rough stone. Luna stopped frequently to let him rest, using these breaks to test the air for any sign of their quarry. The human male's scent was faint but detectable, mixed with something that made Luna's blood run cold. Fear, not his own. The fear of something small and helpless. As they climbed higher, Luna became aware of other scents on the wind. The humans with guns were following the same path, their machines roaring through the forest like angry metal beasts, but they were slower than she was, hindered by their need to stay on the crude roads carved into the mountainside. The old Fletcher mine had been carved into the mountain face in the 1940s, back when Cedar Falls was a booming mining town. The silver had run out decades ago, and the mine had been officially sealed in 1987 after 2 teenagers had gotten lost in the tunnels and nearly died. But official seals had never stopped determined trespassers. Jake Henderson stumbled through the mine's entrance, his flashlight beam dancing crazily across the wet stone walls. He had been hiding in the tunnels for 3 days now, surviving on stale crackers and bottled water he had stolen from a convenience store. In his arms, wrapped in a dirty blanket, was a baby girl no more than 4 months old. She had stopped crying hours ago, too weak from cold and hunger to make much noise. Jake told himself this was better. The crying had been driving him crazy, filling his head with sounds that made his skin crawl. Marie had always said the baby looked like him, but Jake had never seen it. All he saw was a burden, a responsibility he had never wanted. When the money ran out and the bills piled up, when Marie started talking about getting help from social services, Jake had made his decision. Better for everyone if the baby just disappeared. The deeper tunnels of the mine were a maze of interconnected passages, some leading to dead ends, others spiraling down into the mountain's heart. Jake had chosen a passage that led to an old equipment chamber, a place where the miners had once stored their tools. It was cold down here, cold and dark, and far from any sound of human civilization. Jake set the baby down on a pile of rotting burlap sacks and stared at her in the wavering flashlight beam. She was so still, so quiet. Maybe it was already over. Above ground, Luna reached the mine entrance just as Sheriff Rodriguez and his deputies arrived. The humans were making a tremendous amount of noise, their voices echoing off the mountain rocks as they organized their search. "Mike, you take the left tunnel. Jenny, go right. I'll take the main shaft," Tom ordered. "Radio check every 10 minutes, and for God's sake, be careful. These tunnels are unstable." Luna watched from the shadows as the humans disappeared into the mountain. Their artificial lights created dancing shadows on the rock face, and their heavy footsteps echoed through the mine like thunder. But Luna had advantages they didn't. Her nose was 1,000 times more sensitive than theirs, and her eyes could see clearly in almost total darkness. She could track the human male and his precious cargo through passages too narrow for the armed humans to navigate. Shadow whimpered as Luna approached the mine entrance. The smell coming from inside was wrong. Dead air, wet stone, and something else that triggered every survival instinct the young bear possessed. This was not a place for the living, but Luna didn't hesitate. With Shadow reluctantly following, she padded into the darkness. The main tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, wide enough for Luna to walk comfortably. The walls were lined with rotting wooden supports, some of which creaked ominously as she passed. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, creating a symphony of echoes that made it difficult to track specific sounds. But Luna could smell him. The human male, his scent thick with sweat and fear and something else. Madness. And underneath it all, faint but unmistakable, the sweet scent of human baby. The tunnel branched into multiple passages, and Luna paused, testing the air. The human male had gone left, down a narrow passage that curved away from the main shaft. Luna could hear the distant sounds of the armed humans searching other parts of the mine, their voices growing fainter as they moved deeper into the mountain. She squeezed into the smaller tunnel, her massive frame barely fitting through the opening. Shadow had an easier time, his smaller size allowing him to trot along behind her. But the young bear was beginning to panic, overwhelmed by the enclosed space and the strange smells. Suddenly, Shadow let out a sharp yelp of fear. The sound echoed through the mine like a gunshot, bouncing off the walls and multiplying until it became a cacophony of alarm. Luna spun around, but Shadow had simply slipped on a patch of wet stone, scraping his paw but suffering no real injury. However, the damage was done. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, they heard a man's voice cursing loudly, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Jake Henderson had been dozing fitfully when the sound of the bear cub's cry jolted him awake. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The mine chamber was pitch black, except for the dying beam of his flashlight, and the echoing sounds made it impossible to determine their source. Then he remembered. The baby. The mine. His plan to make it all go away. He reached for the bundle of blankets, and his heart nearly stopped. The baby was moving, making soft whimpering sounds. It was still alive. But those sounds in the tunnel. Jake had grown up in these mountains. He knew the difference between human voices and animal calls, and what he had just heard was definitely not human. Bears. Jake grabbed the baby and his dying flashlight and stumbled deeper into the chamber, looking for another way out. But the room was a dead end, carved into solid rock with only one entrance. He was trapped. Luna moved faster now, her massive paws making almost no sound on the wet stone floor. The human male's panic scent was overwhelming, and mixed with it was something that made her blood boil with rage. The baby was weak, dying. She could smell the sickness on it, could sense its life force flickering like a candle in the wind. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and Luna saw him immediately. The human male huddled against the far wall, his small light creating a pathetic circle of yellow illumination. In his arms, the bundle that contained the baby. For a moment, human and bear stared at each other across the chamber. Jake's mouth opened and closed silently, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. A massive brown bear, easily 8 feet tall when standing on its hind legs, blocking his only escape route. And behind it, barely visible in the shadows, a smaller bear cub. "Oh God," Jake whispered. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!" Luna took a step forward, and Jake pressed himself harder against the wall. The blanket in his arm shifted, and a weak cry emerged from within. The sound hit Luna like a physical blow, triggering every protective instinct she possessed. This human male had brought a baby to this cold, dark place to die, just as someone had left the other baby in the forest to freeze. Luna's lips pulled back from her teeth in a silent snarl. "Stay back!" Jake shouted, his voice cracking with terror. "Stay back or I'll ... But he had no weapons, no means of defense, just a dying flashlight and a baby he had never wanted. Luna approached slowly, deliberately. She could see the baby now, could smell its weakness and fear. The infant was barely alive, its tiny body shutting down from cold and neglect. Jake made a decision born of pure panic. He thrust the bundle toward Luna as if offering it as a sacrifice. "Take it," he screamed. "Take the baby. Just let me go, please." But Luna wasn't interested in the human male's escape. She moved past him with surprising gentleness, focusing entirely on the bundle in his trembling hands. With infinite care, she opened her massive jaws and lifted the baby away from him. The infant was even smaller than the first one, barely breathing, its skin cold and waxy. Luna could feel its tiny heartbeat fluttering against her tongue like the wings of a dying bird. She had to get this baby to warmth and safety. Now Jake watched in stunned silence as the enormous bear cradled the baby in her mouth with the same tenderness a human mother might show. It was impossible, incomprehensible, and yet he was seeing it with his own eyes. The bear turned away from him, completely dismissing his presence as if he were no more significant than a piece of furniture. She moved toward the tunnel entrance, the cub following behind her. Jake remained frozen against the wall long after the bears had disappeared, unable to fully process what had just happened. The mind chamber felt even colder without the baby's presence, and he realized with growing horror that he was now truly alone in the darkness. His flashlight flickered once more and died, plunging him into absolute blackness. Luna navigated the mind tunnels with desperate urgency. The baby in her mouth was fading fast, its breathing so shallow she could barely detect it. Behind her, Shadow struggled to keep up, exhausted from the night's adventures. As they approached the main tunnel, Luna heard voices ahead. The human law officers were returning from their search, their lights swinging back and forth across the tunnel walls. "Nothing in the East Passage," one voice called. "Same here. Maybe we got it wrong. Maybe he didn't come up here after all." Luna paused at the junction of tunnels. The humans were blocking her direct path to the mine entrance, and she couldn't risk confrontation while carrying the dying baby. But there had to be another way out. She remembered seeing another passage earlier, one that led upward toward the mountain's peak. It would be a longer journey and steeper, but it might lead to one of the old ventilation shafts that connected to the surface. With no other choice, Luna turned away from the main tunnel and began climbing. The passage grew narrower as it ascended, forcing Luna to squeeze through openings that scraped against her thick fur. Shadow had fallen behind, unable to maintain the pace on the steep, slippery rocks. Luna reached a decision point. She could continue climbing alone, trusting that Shadow would find his way back to her. Or she could stop and wait, risking the baby's life for the sake of her cub. The baby let out a barely audible whimper, and Luna's choice was made. She continued upward, following the tunnel as it wound toward the surface. Finally, after what felt like hours, Luna saw a dim gray light ahead. The passage opened into a narrow shaft that led straight up to the surface. Dawn was breaking over the mountain, sending pale light down through the opening. But the shaft was nearly vertical, impossible for her to climb while carrying the baby. Luna looked around desperately, her mind racing for a solution. Then she saw it. A narrow ledge that spiraled up the inside of the shaft, the remains of an old wooden staircase that miners had once used. Most of the wood had rotted away, but some of the stone supports remained. Luna began to climb. Each step was a leap of faith, trusting her weight to stone supports that hadn't been tested in decades. Several times, rocks crumbled away beneath her paws, sending debris clattering down into the darkness below. But she climbed steadily upward, the baby's life growing weaker with each passing moment. 20 feet from the surface, disaster struck. Luna's hind paw found only empty air where a support should have been, and she nearly lost her grip entirely. The baby bounced in her mouth, letting out a cry of distress that echoed up the shaft. Luna scrabbled desperately against the smooth stone wall, her claws finding purchase in tiny cracks and crevices. For a terrifying moment, she hung, suspended over the drop, the baby's life literally hanging by a thread. Then her paws found solid rock, and she hauled herself up onto the final section of the spiral path. The last 10 feet were the hardest. The wooden stairs were completely gone here, leaving only occasional metal brackets driven into the stone. Luna had to leap from one to the next, trusting that each would hold her massive weight. Finally, gloriously, she emerged into the dawn light. The ventilation shaft opened onto a small clearing surrounded by pine trees high on the mountain slope. The morning air was crystal clear and bitterly cold, but after the stale atmosphere of the mine, it tasted like paradise. Luna gently placed the baby on a patch of snow-free ground and began examining it more closely. The infant was in terrible condition, dehydrated, hypothermic, and barely conscious. Its breathing was so shallow that Luna had to lean close to detect any movement at all. But it was alive, still alive. Luna looked down the mountain toward Cedar Falls. The clinic's lights were still visible far below, a beacon of hope in the growing daylight. But the journey would be long and treacherous, especially carrying such a fragile burden. She was just preparing to lift the baby again when she heard something that made her freeze. Voices, human voices, coming from somewhere in the forest below. Search teams. They must have found the mine entrance and were now spreading out across the mountain, looking for any sign of the missing child. Luna quickly picked up the baby and began moving away from the voices, heading further up the mountain. But she had only gone a few steps when she realized her mistake. Shadow was still somewhere in the mine. Her cub was alone in that dark labyrinth, and she had left him behind. For the second time that night, Luna faced an impossible choice: save the dying human baby or return for her own cub. But this time, the choice was made for her. From somewhere far below, echoing up through the ventilation shaft, came a sound that turned Luna's blood to ice. Shadow's terrified cry, followed by the aggressive roar of another bear, a male bear, territorial, angry, and between him and her cub lay hundreds of yards of dark, twisting tunnels that she had no hope of navigating in time. The baby in her mouth stirred weakly, its life hanging by the thinnest of threads. The human voices in the forest were getting closer, and somewhere in the depths of the mine, Shadow was facing a danger that Luna couldn't protect him from. The mother bear that had risked everything to save human babies now faced the ultimate test. How far would she go? How much would she sacrifice? How far would she go? How much would she sacrifice? And was it possible to save them all? Luna stood frozen at the mouth of the ventilation shaft, her entire world collapsing into this single moment of impossible choice. The baby in her mouth was growing weaker by the second, its tiny heartbeat barely perceptible against her tongue. But Shadow's terrified cries echoing from the mine below tore at her very soul. The aggressive roars coming from the depths were unmistakably those of Kodiak, a massive male bear whose territory bordered Luna's own. He was twice her size, scarred from countless fights, and notorious for his violent temper. If he had cornered Shadow in those narrow tunnels, Luna's maternal instincts warred with each other, save the human baby who needed immediate medical attention, or abandon it to rescue her own cub from certain death. Then, through the chaos of her emotions, Luna heard something that changed everything. Another voice in the mine, human, male, scared but determined. Hey, big guy, over here. Come on, follow me." It was one of the human law officers, and he was deliberately drawing Kodiak's attention away from Shadow. Luna could hear the man's boots echoing through the tunnels as he ran, with the enormous male bear in pursuit. Deputy Mike Foster had been searching the deepest parts of the mine when he'd heard the commotion. As the newest member of the sheriff's department, he'd drawn the short straw and been assigned the most dangerous passages. But when he'd rounded a corner and seen a massive bear cornering a small cub, his training had kicked in. Mike had no love for bears. One had nearly killed his brother during a camping trip 3 years ago. But watching the huge male stalk the terrified cub had awakened something protective in him. Before he could think about what he was doing, he was yelling and throwing rocks, making as much noise as possible. Kodiak had turned toward this new threat with a roar that shook dust from the mine ceiling. The bear was even larger than Mike had thought, easily 9 feet tall on his hind legs. But the deputy stood his ground, backing slowly toward the main tunnel while keeping the bear's attention focused on him. "That's right, you big bastard," Mike muttered under his breath. "Follow me. Leave the little guy alone." Shadow, released from Kodiak's immediate threat, scrambled through a gap in the rocks too small for the larger bear to follow. But instead of fleeing toward the surface, the young cub did something that surprised everyone. He began climbing, straight up. Years of following his mother through the forest had taught Shadow to navigate vertical terrain that would challenge most adult bears. The mine shaft Luna had used was too steep for him, but there were other passages, smaller ones that the humans couldn't see or access. Shadow squeezed through cracks in the rock, following his nose toward the scent of fresh air and pine trees, and underneath it all, the familiar smell of his mother. Above ground, Luna heard the sounds of the chase moving away from where Shadow had been trapped. Her cub was free, at least for the moment. But whether he could find his way out of the mine alive was another question entirely. The baby in her mouth let out a barely audible sigh, and Luna felt the infant's body go completely limp. Panic shot through her like electricity. Without hesitation, she began racing down the mountain toward the distant lights of Cedar Falls. But the terrain was treacherous, made worse by her desperate speed. Loose rocks shifted under her paws, and patches of ice sent her sliding dangerously close to steep drop-offs. The baby bounced in her mouth despite her efforts to cushion it, and Luna feared that her attempt to save the child might be the very thing that killed it. She was halfway down the mountain when she encountered the search teams. "Movement! 2 o'clock!" shouted one of the searchers, a volunteer from the village fire department. Something big coming down the slope. Flashlight beams swung toward Luna, temporarily blinding her. She skidded to a stop, caught in the intersection of 3 different search paths with nowhere to run. Jesus Christ, it's a bear! Does it have something in its mouth? Radio the sheriff. Tell him we found, I don't know what the hell we found." Luna crouched low, protecting the baby with her body as the humans surrounded her. They kept their distance, but she could smell their fear and excitement. Some of them carried weapons, though none were currently aimed at her. "Easy, girl," said an older man with gray hair and kind eyes. This was Dr. James Walsh, the veterinarian who had served Cedar Falls for over 30 years. "Nobody's going to hurt you. We just want to see what you've got there." Dr. Walsh had been part of the search team specifically because Sheriff Rodriguez suspected they might encounter injured wildlife. But this situation was unlike anything in his experience. The bear was clearly agitated, but not aggressive. And unless his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dawn light, she was protecting something small and human-shaped. "Back off, all of you," Dr. Walsh ordered the other searchers. "Give her space. Tom, are you getting this on radio?" Sheriff Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "Copy that, Doc. What's your situation?" "I've got a bear here, Tom, a mother bear, and I think she's got the Henderson baby." The radio went silent for a moment. Then, "Say again, Doc. Did you say the bear has the baby?" "That's affirmative. She's about 50 yards up the slope from the old logging road. But Tom, this bear isn't acting normal. She's protecting the baby, not threatening it." Luna listened to the human sounds, trying to understand their intentions. The older male with the gentle voice had approached closer than the others, his hands empty and his posture non-threatening. She could smell compassion on him, mixed with professional confidence. Dr. Walsh knelt slowly in the snow, making himself less imposing. "I know you're scared," he said softly to Luna. "But that little one needs help, doesn't it? More help than you can give." As if responding to his words, the baby stirred weakly in Luna's mouth. Its breathing was so shallow now that Dr. Walsh had to strain to see any movement at all. "The clinic's not far," he continued, pointing down the mountain. "Dr. Chen is there. She can help. You understand, don't you?" Luna looked from Dr. Walsh to the other humans, then down toward the glowing lights of Cedar Falls. She knew the kind human woman was down there, the one who had taken such gentle care of the first baby. This child needed the same help, but she also knew that the moment she gave up the baby, the humans would try to capture her. They might even kill her, despite her peaceful intentions. She had seen what happened to bears who got too close to human settlements. The decision was made for her by the baby itself. The infant's breathing stopped for several long seconds, then resumed with a gasping breath that sounded like a death rattle. Without further hesitation, Luna gently placed the baby in the snow at Dr. Walsh's feet. The veterinarian quickly scooped up the child, his experienced hands immediately assessing its condition. "Severe hypothermia, dehydration, possible pneumonia," he said to the radio. "We need to get this baby to the clinic immediately." "Doc, what about the bear?" Dr. Walsh looked up at Luna, who had backed away but hadn't fled. She was watching him with an intensity that was almost human in its focus. "The bear's not a threat," he said firmly. "In fact, she just saved this baby's life. Nobody shoots, nobody makes any sudden moves. Let her go." Some of the volunteers grumbled about letting a wild bear wander free so close to town, but Dr. Walsh's authority carried weight. One by one, they stepped aside, creating a clear path for Luna to leave. But Luna didn't take it. Instead, she turned back toward the mountain, toward the mine where Shadow was still lost somewhere in the darkness. "Where are you going, girl?" Dr. Walsh murmured, cradling the baby against his chest. "Your job here is done." Luna paused and looked back at him one last time. In her eyes, Dr. Walsh saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Intelligence, purpose, and a kind of nobility that he had never imagined possible in a wild animal. Then she was gone, disappearing into the forest as silently as a shadow. The journey back up the mountain was a nightmare of exhaustion and fear. Luna's massive frame was built for power, not endurance, and the night's adventures had pushed her far beyond her normal limits. Her paws were bloodied from the rocky terrain, and ice crystals had formed in her fur from the constant exposure to the bitter cold. But nothing mattered except finding Shadow. The mine entrance was chaos when she arrived. Police vehicles lined the access road, their red and blue lights painting the dawn sky in garish colors. Humans in uniform swarmed around the opening, some entering, some emerging, all of them talking in excited voices. Luna crept as close as she dared, using boulders and fallen trees for cover. She needed to know if Shadow had made it out alive, but approaching the mine directly would be suicide with so many armed humans present. Then she heard a voice that made her heart leap with hope. "Sheriff! Sheriff, you need to see this." Deputy Mike Foster emerged from the mine entrance, his uniform torn and dirty, but grinning from ear to ear. In his arms was a small, frightened bear cub, Shadow. "Found him in one of the upper passages," Mike explained to Sheriff Rodriguez. "Poor little guy was scared out of his mind, but he seems okay. No injuries that I can see." Luna's relief was so intense it made her dizzy. Shadow was alive, safe. But he was also in the hands of the humans, and she had no way to get him back without endangering them both. Sheriff Rodriguez examined the cub with experienced eyes. "Mike, you realize what you've got here, don't you? This is probably the cub of that bear everyone's been talking about, the one that saved the babies. The one Dr. Walsh radioed about? Yeah, which means Mama Bear is probably around here somewhere, and she's not going to be happy about us having her baby." As if summoned by his words, a low rumble echoed across the mountainside. It was a sound of pure maternal fury, a warning that every human present understood on an instinctive level. Luna had revealed herself. She stood at the edge of the tree line, her massive form backlit by the rising sun. Even at a distance of 100 yards, her rage was palpable. "Nobody move," Sheriff Rodriguez ordered quietly. "Mike, put the cub down, slowly." "Sheriff, what if—" "Put it down, Mike. Now." Deputy Foster gently placed Shadow on the ground. The young cub immediately began crying for his mother, a sound that cut through the morning air like a knife. Luna heard her baby calling for her, and every muscle in her body tensed for a charge. There were too many humans, too many weapons. But none of that mattered. Shadow needed her. But before she could move, something extraordinary happened. Shadow broke free from the cluster of humans and began running toward her. His legs pumped as fast as they could carry him across the snowy ground, his cries of relief audible even over the wind. The humans made no move to stop him. They simply watched as mother and cub were reunited, as Luna gathered Shadow against her chest and nuzzled him frantically, checking every inch of his small body for injuries. For a long moment, the two bears stood together at the forest's edge while dozens of humans watched in respectful silence. It was a scene that none of them would ever forget. The raw power of a mother's love transcending the boundaries between species. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, Luna melted back into the forest with Shadow at her side. The humans were left staring at empty trees and disturbed snow, wondering if the whole incident had been some kind of shared hallucination. Sheriff Rodriguez was the first to break the silence. "Mike, you ever tell anyone that I let a bear walk away with evidence from a crime scene, and I'll have your badge. You understand me?" "Evidence? What evidence? I don't see any evidence here." "Good man." Dr. Walsh's voice crackled over the radio. "Tom, you there?" "The baby's stable. Dr. Chen thinks she'll make a full recovery." "That's great news, Doc. What about the other one, the baby from last night?" "Also doing well. It's like someone was watching over them, both of them." Sheriff Rodriguez looked toward the forest where Luna and Shadow had disappeared. "Yeah, Doc, someone was." 2 miles away, back in the safety of their territory, Luna finally allowed herself to rest. She had found a sheltered cave where she and Shadow could wait out the worst of the winter, a place far from human trails and noise. But as she settled down with her cub curled against her side, Luna found herself thinking about the babies she had saved. Were they warm now? Were they being cared for? Would they grow up strong and healthy, never knowing how close they had come to death in the frozen wilderness? Shadow, exhausted by his ordeal, fell asleep almost immediately. But Luna remained awake, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant sounds of the human world below. She had crossed a line tonight, had ventured into places no bear should go, and done things that defied all natural instinct. Some would say she had risked too much, that a wild animal's first responsibility was to its own kind. But as she listened to Shadow's peaceful breathing and remembered the tiny heartbeats she had felt against her tongue, Luna knew she would do it all again without hesitation. The bond between mother and child was stronger than species, stronger than fear, stronger than the ancient barriers that separated the human and animal worlds. And sometimes, just sometimes, that bond was strong enough to work miracles. As dawn broke fully over the mountain, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Luna finally closed her eyes and slept. She dreamed of warm blankets and gentle hands, of grateful eyes and the sweet sound of babies breathing steadily in safety. But her rest was not to last long. For even as she slept, events were unfolding in Cedar Falls that would soon draw her back into the human world once more. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the pediatric ward of the clinic, looking down at the 2 babies who had been brought to her within hours of each other. They lay in adjacent cribs, both stable now, but bearing the signs of their terrible ordeals. The first baby, the one Luna had carried across the frozen river, was a girl. Someone had named her Hope. The second, rescued from the mine, was also a girl. She had been called Grace. Both babies were expected to make full recoveries, but their futures remained uncertain. Social services would take custody soon, and they would likely be placed in different foster homes, possibly in different states. Dr. Chen had delivered dozens of babies over the years, had saved countless young lives, but she had never felt such a personal connection to patients before. These children had been touched by something extraordinary, saved by a force that defied explanation. As she watched Hope reach out her tiny hand toward Grace's crib, Dr. Chen made a decision that would change all their lives. She was going to adopt them, both of them. The paperwork would be complicated, the process lengthy. But Dr. Chen had savings, she had a stable career, and most importantly, she had seen firsthand the miracle that had brought these babies into her care. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for social services. "Hello, this is Dr. Sarah Chen at Cedar Falls Medical Clinic. I'd like to discuss adoption procedures for 2 infants currently in my care." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, promising a new day full of possibilities. In the forest, Luna slept peacefully with Shadow beside her, unaware that her actions had set in motion a chain of events that would soon bring her back into contact with the human world. For the story of the mother bear who saved human babies was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But the next chapter would bring challenges that Luna had never imagined, and choices that would test the very limits of her courage and compassion. The bond she had forged with the human world was about to be put to the ultimate test. And this time, it wouldn't just be babies at stake. It would be the future of both species and the delicate bridge of understanding that Luna had unknowingly begun to build between them. The telephone in Dr. Chen's office rang at 3:17 p.m., just as she was finishing her notes on the two babies. The voice on the other end was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the director of the State Wildlife Management Department. Dr. Chen, I'm calling about the reports we've received regarding a bear intervention at your clinic. We need to discuss this situation immediately. Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of discussion? The kind that involves a dangerous predator that has lost its natural fear of humans. We're organizing a tracking team to locate and neutralize the animal before it becomes a threat to public safety. Neutralize? You mean kill her? If necessary, yes. Dr. Chen, I understand you may have developed some attachment to this animal, but you have to understand the danger. A bear that approaches human settlements, especially one that interacts with children, cannot be allowed to remain free. Dr. Chen gripped the phone tighter. This bear saved 2 lives. She's not a threat. She's a wild animal that has crossed a line that should never be crossed. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen, but the decision has been made. The tracking team deploys tomorrow morning. The line went dead, leaving Dr. Chen staring at the phone in horror. In the cribs beside her, Hope and Grace slept peacefully, unaware that their miraculous savior had just been sentenced to death. But Dr. Chen was not alone in her determination to protect Luna. Within hours of Dr. Morrison's call, word had spread throughout Cedar Falls. Deputy Mike Foster, who had witnessed Luna's gentle reunion with Shadow, immediately called Sheriff Rodriguez. Dr. Walsh contacted every veterinarian and wildlife expert he knew. Even Marcus Thompson, the night security guard, began making phone calls. By evening, something unprecedented was happening in the small mountain town. A movement was growing, fueled by the extraordinary events they had all witnessed. "We can't let them kill her," Dr. Chen said to the packed town hall meeting that had been hastily organized. This bear didn't just save 2 babies. She saved them with intelligence, with purpose, with something that looked an awful lot like love. Sheriff Rodriguez stood up next. "I've been in law enforcement for 25 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen anything like what happened on that mountain. That bear understood what she was doing. She chose to save human lives." Dr. Walsh nodded gravely. From a scientific perspective, Luna's behavior challenges everything we thought we knew about animal cognition and maternal instinct. She's not just another bear, she's special. Old Mrs. Whitman, who had first called about the Henderson baby, wiped tears from her eyes. That bear has more humanity in her than some humans I know. We can't let them hurt her. The meeting continued past midnight, with virtually the entire population of Cedar Falls participating. By dawn, they had formed the Luna Protection Committee and had contacted every major news outlet, wildlife organization, and social media platform they could find. The story of Luna spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, Number Saved a Luna was trending worldwide. Videos taken by the search team members showed Luna gently carrying the babies, peacefully surrendering them to human care, and reuniting with Shadow in a display of maternal love that moved millions. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison found herself fielding calls from around the globe. Scientists, conservationists, celebrities, and ordinary people all demanding that Luna be protected rather than hunted. The governor's office was inundated with messages. Environmental groups threatened legal action. 3 days after the phone call that had seemed to seal Luna's fate, Dr. Morrison called Dr. Chen back. "Dr. Chen, I'm calling to inform you that the tracking operation has been canceled indefinitely. The bear will be monitored from a safe distance, but no action will be taken unless she poses a direct threat to human safety. Dr. Chen closed her eyes in relief. Thank you, you're making the right choice. The choice was made for me, Dr. Morrison admitted. I've never seen public pressure like this, but Dr. Chen? The bear needs to stay in her territory. If she approaches the town again, she won't, Dr. Chen said with certainty she didn't entirely feel. She's done what she needed to do. 6 months later, Dr. Chen stood in the backyard of her new home on the outskirts of Cedar Falls. The adoption papers had been finalized just the week before, and Hope and Grace were now legally her daughters. At 8 months old, they were thriving. Happy, healthy babies who seemed to share an unusual bond with each other and an uncanny calm around animals. "Mama," Grace babbled, pointing toward the tree line where the forest met Dr. Chen's property. Dr. Chen looked up and felt her breath catch in her throat. There, barely visible in the evening shadows, stood Luna. The great bear was watching them from a distance, Shadow now nearly full-grown beside her. For a long moment, the two mothers regarded each other across the space between their worlds. Luna had kept her promise. She had stayed in the wild, away from human civilization. But somehow, she had known when the adoption was finalized. Somehow, she had come to see that the babies she had saved were thriving. Hope reached out her tiny hand toward the forest, making soft cooing sounds. Luna's ears perked forward, and for just an instant, Dr. Chen could have sworn she saw the bear nod. Then Luna turned and disappeared into the forest with Shadow, leaving only the whisper of moving branches and the scent of wild pine on the evening breeze. Dr. Chen picked up both babies, holding them close. "She came to say goodbye," she whispered. "Your guardian angel came to say goodbye." But it wasn't really goodbye. Over the years that followed, there were occasional sightings of Luna and her growing family. She had more cubs. Shadow remained with her, helping to raise his younger siblings. Wildlife cameras sometimes caught glimpses of them in the deep forest, always far from human settlements. Dr. Chen kept a photo on her desk taken by a nature photographer 3 years after the rescue. It showed Luna teaching a group of young cubs to fish in a mountain stream, Shadow watching protectively from the bank. She was exactly what she had always been, a mother, devoted and fierce and loving. Hope and Grace grew up hearing the story of their rescue, though they were too young to remember the cold night when Luna carried them to safety. They developed into remarkable children, exceptionally kind, unnaturally calm around animals, and possessed of an intuitive understanding of the natural world that amazed their teachers and friends. On their 5th birthday, Dr. Chen took them camping in the mountains, not near Luna's territory, but in a place where they could safely experience the wilderness that had almost claimed their lives. As they sat around the campfire that night, Hope looked up at the stars and asked, "Mama, do you think Luna remembers us?" Dr. Chen pulled both girls closer. "I think she remembers you every day, and I think she knows that you're safe and loved and happy. That's all any mother really wants." Grace nodded solemnly. "When I grow up, I want to help animals like Luna helped us." "And I want to be a doctor like you, Mama," Hope added, "so I can help babies like Luna helped babies." Dr. Chen smiled, knowing that Luna's gift hadn't just been the rescue itself, but the inspiration it would carry forward through generations. Cedar Falls erected a statue in the town square 5 years after the rescue. It showed a mother bear gently carrying a baby, with an inscription that read, "To Luna, who taught us that love knows no boundaries, and that courage comes in all forms. In memory of an extraordinary mother who showed us the best of what we can be." Sheriff Rodriguez, now retired, made a speech at the dedication ceremony. A lot of people have asked me over the years if I really believe a bear could understand complex emotions, could make deliberate choices to save human lives. All I can tell you is what I saw with my own eyes. I saw an animal risk everything for creatures that weren't her own species, weren't her responsibility, weren't anything to her except innocent life in need of protection. If that's not love, if that's not heroism, then I don't know what is. Luna reminded us that the capacity for good exists in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes our greatest teachers come on 4 paws instead of 2 legs. Dr. Walsh, now in his 80s, nodded from the crowd. He still kept the radio recording of the moment Luna first appeared with the baby, and he played it sometimes for visiting scientists who came to study the Cedar Falls incident. Most of them left more humbled than when they had arrived. Luna herself lived to a remarkable age for a wild bear, finally passing peacefully in her den, surrounded by Shadow and her other offspring. The wildlife cameras that had monitored her territory from a respectful distance captured her final weeks. She spent them teaching her youngest cubs to fish, to find shelter, to survive in a world that could be both beautiful and dangerous. Her legacy lived on not just in her own cubs, but in the changed hearts of everyone who had witnessed her story. The Luna Wildlife Preserve was established in her memory, protecting thousands of acres of wilderness and serving as a research center for animal cognition and behavior. But perhaps the greatest testament to Luna's impact was simpler and more personal. Hope grew up to become a veterinarian specializing in wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. Grace became a pediatric surgeon, dedicating her life to saving children. Both women kept photos of Luna in their offices, the same photo doctor. Chen had treasured, showing the great bear teaching her cubs by the mountain stream. They married loving partners and had children of their own, passing down the story of the mother bear who had saved them when they were helpless infants. Their children grew up understanding that family wasn't just about blood relations, that protection came in many forms, and that the greatest acts of heroism often went unwitnessed and unrewarded. On quiet evenings, when Hope and Grace would visit Dr. Chen in her retirement home, they would sometimes talk about Luna and wonder if she had any idea of the ripple effects her actions had created. Dr. Chen, now in her 90s but still sharp as ever, would smile and say, "Oh, I think she knew. Mothers always know when their children turn out well." The last entry in Dr. Chen's journal, written just days before her own peaceful passing, simply read, "I have lived a full life, blessed with 2 daughters who were gifts from the wilderness itself. I have seen miracles, witnessed acts of impossible love, and learned that the boundaries between species exist mainly in our minds, not in our hearts. Luna taught us all that a mother's love is perhaps the most powerful force in the universe, capable of crossing any divide, overcoming any obstacle, transcending any difference. I go to my rest knowing that somewhere in the mountains, Luna's descendants still roam free, and somewhere in the valleys below, the children she saved are raising children of their own, passing on the lessons of courage, compassion, and unconditional love. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ends with something better. It ends with love ever after. Thank you, Luna, for everything. And in the mountains above Cedar Falls, where the pine trees whisper ancient secrets, and the snow falls soft and clean, the descendants of Luna and Shadow still roam. They carry in their genes not just the instincts of their wild ancestors, but something more, a genetic memory of kindness, an inherited understanding that sometimes the greatest courage is found in helping those who cannot help themselves. Park rangers and wildlife researchers occasionally report unusual sightings, bears that seem unusually calm around humans, cubs that show remarkable problem-solving abilities, and always Mother bears who display an extraordinary protectiveness, not just for their own young, but for any creature in distress. The scientists can't explain it. The data doesn't support it. The behavior defies everything they know about wild animal psychology. But the locals of Cedar Falls know better. They know that some gifts transcend genetics, that some lessons are written not in DNA but in the soul. Luna's story became a legend, but more than that, it became a truth that changed how an entire community viewed the relationship between humans and the natural world. It spawned conservation programs, inspired countless acts of kindness, and reminded people that heroes come in all sizes, and sometimes they come covered in fur with hearts bigger than anyone ever imagined possible. The mother bear who carried lost babies across a frozen river had accomplished something far greater than a simple rescue. She had built a bridge between two worlds, and that bridge would stand for generations. Love ever after, indeed.